Buckle up, Internet, because I'm Jockey Fox, and today I'm bringing you an exciting idea that has been building in my head for a long time. But recently, I found more historical basis for it. Today, we're going to be talking about cyber socialism. So in my last video on unions, I talked about how we need to be forming advocacy groups, local community mutual aid networks. But I think it goes a bit broader than that, and that's something I want to explain in this video. But in addition to that, you could walk away from that video thinking that we aren't already doing that. And we are. There are a large number of organizations that have roots in socialism, if not are openly socialist. One that comes to mind that you either love or you hate is the Democratic Socialists of America. And for whatever you may think of them and their particular brand of politics, or the fact that they're willing to endorse political candidates, which can be a sore spot for some leftists, I think that that's important because ultimately the way we take power is by building an alternative power structure that can compete with the dishonest capitalist interests. And for the record, they have been somewhat successful, getting increasingly more progressive people into positions of power, especially on the local level. And we saw that not only with the Squad, whatever you think about them, in each generation of progressively more left-wing and more genuinely working class people that have kind of come into that group, but also some of the big upsets that we've seen on the Democratic side in the recent primaries. There's also any number of socialist environmental groups, and another organization that I think of as being a really good example of another type of community organization that we need is the anarchist organization Food Not Bombs. I used to live near one of these, and they had their own community garden. They did a lot of stuff with that local produce, and they were kind of like this self-sustainable commune pod of being able to feed a certain number of local people in the community without charging them. But I think probably a broader issue is that all of these organizations kind of exist independent of one another. Even though we all have broadly the same philosophical leaning and overall moral motivations for what we're doing. There's also the problem, and this is a problem that I always run into when I'm feeling motivated enough, and I feel like I can do enough, and I feel like I can change the world. I try to reach out to these organizations, I find only a couple of them, and none of them happen to be where I live. I once did this about an hour away for a DSA chapter. I attended a few of their meetings and teaching workshops and stuff like that. But what I did to find them was I looked up what kind of groups socialist groups operate inside the United States, and then I went to their websites, and then I went to their chapter locator, find one near you, and maybe I had to go to another website, and then I found a location that was roughly close to me and I could look at their events. And I'm not saying that that's a lot of work. It's pretty easy to do actually if you know what you're looking for, but the problem is that we may not know what we're looking for. And there's so many different organizations that even if, say, there wasn't a DSA chapter near me, there might be a Food Not Bombs chapter near me. And I might just not be aware that that organization exists and not know to look for it. So this is where we get into some of the cyber socialism. And I've said this already in Socializing Social Media. We need to build our own platform. Preferably one that has a back end that's not being operated for the profit of Amazon or Google. A real sustainable leftist project from the ground up that could offer a central hub where people could go to find an organization that supports leftist ideals near them that they can interface with and that they can build up. I think this would be the ultimate convenience and really especially beneficial for leftist content creators such as myself, because it would be it would be so great to be able to say, go to Slay the Behemoth.commie or something, and you would be able to, no matter where you are in the world, and you would be able to find socialist organizations close to your house that you could interface with in some meaningful way. But this platform would not only serve as a search structure, it could also be sort of a socialist media platform. It could also encourage the groups that are listed on it to have an easy way to reach out to one another, and to reach out to other types of groups in the community. It would be an easy way for an organization to search in their area and find other organizations that might have similar interests, ethos, and philosophy that they could collaborate with on the local level to accomplish shared goals. So here's my dream for the kind of anarcho-socialist world that I would like to see everyone organize in their local communities. These sorts of organizations exist everywhere and basically represent everyone. Not everyone has to participate, but enough people participate that the interests of the community are well represented by a diverse group of people. These organizations would have hyper-local aspirations and goals, but they could come together and form larger organizations within their local area in order to work on larger projects that their collaborative efforts might be useful for. And then those organizations would be able to feed into a larger state network with the same goals, and that would feed into a national network, and that would feed into a global network, and then we are all represented. And once we are all represented, if we can build that kind of network, then we really have a chance to change the structure that global capitalism has put in place. Because capitalism allowed that structure to be built very organically and haphazardly in a way that there was just really no centralized control or planning or structure behind beyond whatever made the most profits and well, I would say wasn't illegal, but that's not really a thing. The fines for which, wouldn't cut into the profits too bad, I guess. And there's probably a lot of quirks and failures all throughout such a system, and the whole philosophy of infinite growth is inherently a failure, and we should understand economic inequality as an economic failure inherently. And see, all this sounds good in theory, but for the common man, most people, they know capitalism. That's the evil that they know. Socialism is just a theory to them. They don't see it, that it's out there acting in their favor. I think the first step in showing them is that there actually are socialist organizations out there that are intent on helping. And the best way to do that is by acting on the local level, because this is the most intimate level for really changing someone's life. And sometimes bigger projects that are built for, broadly a large number of people's benefits, but don't necessarily involve a person directly, those can be overlooked. Those projects are obviously important as well, but there's something about touching an individual's life that I think has a real power to create a certain loyalty. And then, if all those individual groups with all their individual interests can work together in a collaborative network, we might find that we ourselves have the access to the resources that we might actually be able to compete with the failing structures that exist all around us. I'm not saying that we're going to be able to raise as much money as the ownership class, but we might be able to, through designing our efforts around compassion instead of profit, be able to demonstrate that another world is possible through the power of this organizational structure. Because it is made of so many constituent parts and categorized into so many organizational levels of power, this system is inherently quite decentralized and also very adaptable. And this is where we take a step deeper and a step into history.
What happened when I got to Chile and took over this team? Let us look at a little diagram to show how I set about things. I built it up on a piece of paper lying on the table between us. Then a system 3 and a system 4, and I got that far. And then I got to system 5, and I drew a big histrionic breath. And I said, I was going to say, this compañero presidente is you. Before I could say it, he suddenly smiled very broadly, and he said, system 5, at last, the people, at last, the people.
Because once we essentially have all of these organizations, or in this metaphor, nodes, network together, feeding each other information about the resources that they have access to, but also the manpower that they have available and the amount of time that they can put towards an effort, we could build a system that aligns the supply of those resources with the needs as they exist in communities in a very intelligent and targeted way. But this has all already been done. In fact, it happened in 1970 in Chile, despite the fact that the country at the time only had 50 computers and the internet didn't exist.
The challenge of ideas.
The conflict itself, how can it be defined? Well, let's look at it this way. The communist bloc would like to see the entire world under communist domination. They have begun to talk more and more about their ability to win from us in the arena of ideas. This, of course, is fine with us, for we are a people with a traditionally great faith in our ideas, the ideas that have moved mountains and created wealth and shaped us as free men. And we are confident that history can do no other than award us the victory in any contest in which ideas are the weapon.
Allende indeed had some ideas. In his bipolar world, socialism conjured up images of violent overthrow, property seizure, and executions, and, well, autocratic control. He believed there could be a new way.
Aquí se siente la historia. Aquí estamos afianzando nuestro derecho a construir un porvenir de justicia y libertad, de abrirnos paso hacia el socialismo.
Chilean socialism would not include servitude to American corporate interests, nor a Soviet-styled bureaucracy, nor armed insurrection, as was accomplished in Cuba. He believed that socialist revolution could occur democratically in Chile, within the existing legal framework and without violence. He dreamed of a uniquely Chilean revolution, a chill revolution, one of red wine and empanadas. Allende's idea, and the platform on which he was elected, was that the government should serve the needs of the people, particularly that the profit earned from Chile's natural resources should remain in Chile to produce consumer goods that would be of use to Chileans. His challenge was not one of ideas, but of production and ownership.
The project was the first effort of President Salvador Allende, and this project was called Cybersen, or locally Cinco.
The first step to accomplishing this was for the Chilean government to purchase, legally, the mines, factories, and banks already operating in Chile from their foreign owners, so that the future profits from these industries would not disappear overseas, but rather that they would remain in Chile's national economy. Hardly a radical idea, but a Chile for Chileans would be the cause for which Allende would give his life 3 years later. Here's where cybernetic feedback comes in. Managing a whole network of resources, labor, and production from government offices in the capital would be very difficult. It would require a massive government bureaucracy, which, as we still know today, are colossally inefficient. But Flores had an idea. What if they introduced cybernetic feedback into their centralized system? Then, information could be received and acted upon in real time. For example, if there were raw materials backed up at one smelter, they could send it to another smelter with less on their plate before it caused disruptions. Or again, if there were raw materials stacked up somewhere, transportation could be diverted to a factory where they could be turned into consumer products. The entire production line could, in theory, work on automatic feedback. If resource extraction, refineries, factories, and transport were all directed from a centralized computing center, these nodes would run on their own most of the time, with the control center stepping in only when important decisions had to be made or if something went wrong. In 1970, this was nothing more than a thought experiment. The technology for it did not exist yet, anywhere, though we see its legacy everywhere today. This is why the project was so ingenious. Not only did they theorize it, but they had to build it from the limited resources they had available to them. There were only 4 mainframe computers in the entire country at the time. In 1971, Flores hired Beer, one of the world's leading cyberneticians, to consult on the implementation of this grand idea, to develop the technologies required to make it happen, and eventually to run the whole Chilean national economy. Beer agreed, having only a vague idea of what he was getting into.
Now, the story that I want to tell you began in 1971, and I suddenly got a letter which very much changed my life. It was from the technical general manager of the State Planning Board of Chile. He remarked in this letter that he had studied all my works, he had collected a team of scientists together, and would I please come and take it over? I could hardly believe it, as you can imagine. But this was to start me on a journey which made me travel 8,000 miles over and over and over again. I was commuting between London and Santiago for 2 years.
And this was happening around the same time, by the way, that DARPA was developing the ARPANET in the United States. I think it's worth being said that one of the prototypes of the internet was designed to help a country recover from imperialism and to make sure the quality of the life of the people, of the workers, was taken into consideration and accounted for. Meanwhile, the version of the internet that would ultimately go on to form the structure, the commercial structure of the internet, .com being .commerce and the most common type of website on our modern internet, was all based on a military platform. For one, it's kind of mind-blowing to think about what this type of internet might have instead evolved into from the CyberSyn project. And the CyberSyn project also reminds me of another project that seems to be kind of along the same lines, although it was never really implemented on the same scale. But, you know, it's kind of along those same lines. It might be of interest to people who think that this type of thing is cool, and that's the Venus Project, which is a futurist, resource-based economy type model that's not necessarily socialist, but also isn't misaligned with what I think that a modern socialism should attempt to be.
The Venus Project is a veritable blueprint for the genesis of a new world civilization based on human concern and environmental reclamation. It proposes a holistic social design in which automation and technology would be intelligently integrated to maximize the quality of life rather than simply profits.
Undesirable behaviors are products of long exposure to detrimental environments. If we wish to surpass the limitations of our present-day society, such as war, hunger, poverty, and bigotry, we need to make changes and arrange society very differently.
And one of the reasons that I think that we can beat capitalism if we have a large enough structure, intelligently networked in the same way that the CyberSyn project was, is that capitalism is first inherently unstable. But the capitalist control system has also been built through greed. It has not been built in the most efficient way, and it doesn't make decisions in a way that is efficient for anything other than profit. And even and only short-term profit, really. Like, most of the people who are really in charge of these companies say that they would take short-term profits over long-term gains in this current economy, and that's just absolutely wild. They don't even care about the futures of their companies as long as they can make a little bit more money for another year. And long term, it cannot sustain itself this way. And there is no one who can be truly satisfied for a system like this except for the wealthiest among us. However, a system that actually considered people, the people that it served, that system would create inherently better outcomes, even if it didn't have access to the same level of resources, because at least those resources would be directed to aims that actually help people in material ways. And building these networks smart enough and large enough and making them inherently responsive to people's needs to the point where they could almost anticipate them. And this is where it gets really exciting for me. And I think I'm going to do my next video on just the comparison of if we had this system in place now. Compare how that would function. How it was designed to function based on the 1970s model. And how that would just ridiculously outperform the capitalist American model, specifically on the topic of baby food and baby formula right now, which we are experiencing a really dire shortage of. And I think if we could show people that socialism is a real and functional idea, and that we can perform alongside the best of the capitalists. The socialist model does more things to help people than the capitalist model, even with less resources. Then people could realize that they want to give it more power, and that is the point where the socialist network could organically overcome the capitalist system. And I think that embracing the fact that governing ourselves through elected representatives that are easily bribed, especially in a world that is increasingly complex, this just doesn't fit the modern age. There are definitely aspects of this project that would be very important to consider, making the whole project open source so that people could easily verify that it isn't doing anything shady or pumping resources into someone's back pocket. And I mean, that was the propaganda that existed and was propagated by the CIA during the 1970s against Chile. So it would be very helpful to be able to point to the fact that it doesn't do any of these things that people might claim if it was open source. There's also a lot of other considerations to be had here. This is not an easy system to put in place. However, we do have capitalist versions of all of the things that CyberSyn ran on, and they have become astronomically more sophisticated and powerful since the CyberSyn project was launched over 50 years ago. So, with a little adaptation and use of modern technology, it's entirely possible that some brilliant programmer out there could take open source versions of the 5 control modules and use modern programming to connect those together in such a way that it would be the backbone of an intelligent resource management system that would be able to support the socialist cause, because resource management is very inefficient under capitalism. Because all of those resources are chasing money, and that's generally not the most efficient way to determine how resources should be used. It's also an inherently reactive system, and remember that I said that this system was designed to be more anticipatory. And we can see that the capitalist system is failing in this in places like homelessness, or the fact that people go hungry when we make more food on this planet and in this country than our population can eat every year, and time again, people still go hungry. This is one of the examples of how even working with less resources, because of a focus on compassion being the end goal instead of profit, a socialist system could do inherently more. But this is what we have to do in the meantime to build that system bit by bit. And everyone has a role that they can play in this. Of course, designing the architecture of the digital system will be important. And this should be an open source project, which would also allow a lot of people to collaborate on it. And with our collaborative efforts, we could do something that no one could do individually. We could do something that even surpasses the CyberSyn project. But even if you aren't good with computers, there are any number of ways that you could get out there and help in building and supporting existing socialist networks and helping them get coordinated with one another. Because I think that there are a lot of bigger goals that we could accomplish, but those goals have to start with the coordination of the existing interested parties that are already working in the space. There also has to be a way of raising awareness in the local area that these groups exist to begin with. Project CyberSyn is probably the most mind-blowing thing I've heard about all year, and I know I really didn't go into a lot of detail on what it is in this video. To learn more about this project and kind of have your own shower thoughts about how this might revolutionize the world, I encourage you to leave those shower thoughts in the comments so the whole community here can see them and that we can dream about this better world together. Thank you for tuning in.